Alrighty, we are live on YouTube and we are live on Facebook. So, kind of trying something out new today. We're gonna try to, get some more channels onto our live streams, our weekly streams. So definitely, as you guys, kind of follow our channels, we're hoping to kind of, open them up a little bit, bring our communities together, because we do have a community over on YouTube as well as the wonderful people over on Facebook. So enough of that. What we are doing today is we're going to be talking a little bit more about kind of the credit report. Now, I'm sure a lot of you kind of remember last week's live stream with, kind of a brief kind of rundown of the credit report itself, but we didn't get too far in depth with it. And I do want to talk a little bit about kind of the credit report breakdown and kind of how FICO and Vantage really treat it, separately, and they kind of score and weight different categories differently. So, really kind of jumping on into things with, the general kind of credit report and how it's laid out, just in case, those of you are joining in who didn't see last week's live stream, or maybe you're unfamiliar with kind of the credit report and how it functions. Generally, it's going to be kind of broken down into a couple of main categories, with the first category that you're ever going to see being labeled as kind of the personal information section. And once again, this is going to be everything that kind of includes, once again, your name, maybe previous names, or if you're remarried or married, you'll have maybe your maiden name as well as, your current up-to-date name. And then you'll also have kind of a section under here with your addresses that you've lived at, and really just any addresses kind of tied to the locations that you were previously living. So not every single location is going to be included here, but more often than not, you're going to have a couple locations here probably. And we did discuss in the past that it is very important that you kind of have one name and one location that are up to date on your actual credit report. So just make sure everything's kind of going well as, we see kind of people filter in. So, and, kind of like what we've been saying, with the credit report and everything, it is very important that, once again, you only really have that up-to-date address as well as your up-to-date name here, because any kind of, accounts that are tied to those previous names or addresses, if you choose to dispute in the future, it will be a lot easier to kind of make your case more readable to, the people at the bureaus, because they do have a automated filing system called eOscar, which, let's face it, will probably filter the majority of letters they get. So any kind of ways that you can try to get past this automated filter and really get it into a real person's hands, sitting at the desk at one of the three major credit bureaus, the better the chances are that they're going to be able to, listen to you and reason with you when it comes to a lot of these collections. But kind of enough about the personal information section. If you're not so much looking at credit repair and you're just starting your credit building journey, this section probably isn't going to be as long as what I previously stated. Really, it's only going to have the names and addresses associated with the lines of credit you currently have, because at the end of the day, the credit report is an outline of all of your credit. So some information may not be accurate, and it still is worth updating that if you can. But before we dive on into, some of the FICO and, Vantage specifics of the credit report itself, I do want to remind everybody that is kind of tuning in here to definitely, as I'm just kind of talking about things, if things are confusing you or maybe a question pops in your head, just type it out in the comments there, and I'll be sure to try to read it and answer it as well. And, I'll try to give some time at the end of the live stream to really allow you guys to get your questions answered, because credit is a very complicated topic. I want to make sure you guys are getting the answers you want to the questions that you guys have. So, anyways, kind of getting on into, the next kind of major section of that credit report, which is going to be more centered around credit itself. This is where, things are going to be labeled as, your credit lines with the lenders you have those credit lines with, as well as some of the balances or collection or statuses of those accounts. So this is really kind of the meat and potatoes, if you will, of all of your credit history. While the, personal information section matters, that isn't exactly what is calculating your score itself. In reality, your score is only going to really be calculated from what's on this second section, which is all of your credit finances. Now, there are a couple different categories here that are weighed differently between FICO and Vantage, but just to talk a little bit about FICO first, since it is the more popular of the two scoring models, the kind of most weighted category here is going to be payment history. Now, payment history, kind of like the name implies, and I did talk a little bit about this in some of our previous videos, but just a refresher, is going to be really everything that comes into making your payments on time or in full. Even making one missed late payment can really drastically affect your score because it's written down into this category here. And once again, this is 35% of your entire FICO credit score. So very, very important category. And that's why generally the number one credit advice people will give is to make your payments on time and in full. Now, not everybody's able to do that, which is where some of the differences between FICO and Vantage come from. And to kind of switch gears over to Vantage and really how they weigh this category is actually a little bit different. Now, they're going to weigh payment history as 40% of the total Vantage score, but as you kind of recall in some of our previous content where we talked about Vantage, it is going to be more pro-consumer, aka they may be more willing to forgive a once in a blue moon, late payment. If you're somebody who can prove that you have a good history of making your payments on time, having one missed payment or late payment may not affect it as much as, say, your FICO score. But one thing to really kind of keep in mind here is that no matter what, your FICO and Vantage scores are using the same kind of sections on your credit report. So these scores are pulling the same information, and it is very important to know that if your Vantage score is changing, also your FICO score and vice versa. There is no, one and done credit report for FICO and one and done credit report for Vantage. So kind of going back over to the next category with the FICO scoring breakdown, it is going to be the accounts owed. Now, this is once again going to be kind of all of your open trade lines and generally going to include, the account information related with those lines of credit. Say, who the lender is, if they're reporting to Experian, it'll be listed there. Maybe they're only reporting to 2 of the major credit bureaus out of the 3. So sometimes this information may have some discrepancies, which is why your credit scores can fluctuate if you're pulling a credit score from, say, Experian and then TransUnion. You check the following week, they can be different, and definitely don't freak out if that's the case. It's very, very normal. Now, if there's a huge difference, say 50 points or more, that's probably where you want to be a little bit concerned, but generally, you can try to get those things cleared up with the lender themselves, asking them, hey, I'd love to know kind of what the credit bureaus you're reporting to are, and if it's possible, could you report to this one instead? Now, this isn't going to say it's going to work, but just getting the clarity and peace of mind from the lender directly from them, it could be a good option to go. Now, kind of going over to Vantage, and they don't really have a accounts owed category, but really the second most common or most weighted category on their section of the credit report is going to be age and type of credit. Now, very, very similar to how accounts owed is really functioned, but they are kind of including the length of credit history here. And this is very important because we have stated that the older the credit lines are, generally with credit cards, installment loans, mortgages, just all across the board, the better this category is going to do. And honestly, FICO also looks at this as well, with their category being completely by itself for length of credit history, weighted at 15% of your total score. So it is very, very important that you don't close out those old unused credit cards. It's very, very just overall a good thing to do. And if you're worried about them getting closed, maybe just go and buy a tank of gas with them, or maybe a lamp or something small, just to at least get you into that 1% utilization. Because if you're really spending less than 1% of your total credit limit on a card, you risk them closing them automatically, which closing a card like this will lower your total available credit, which can drastically affect your scores. So very, very important, especially if you're building credit or maybe repairing credit, that you don't close out those old cards. So let me just make sure we got no comments here or anything. And definitely, as we're kind of going through this, once again, if you're new to the chat, be sure to write any comments or questions that you guys may have, and I'll be sure to get to them and answer them. So kind of going back over to it. So with FICO, we talked about kind of the amounts owed category weighting at 30%. Next up, we did talk about length of credit history. So there is going to be a new credit section, which once again, this is where the hard and soft inquiries come into play with you and your credit score, which hard inquiries are going to be those hard credit checks that are pulled from applications for new credit lines, and this will lower your credit score. Now, the common misconception here is that checking your own credit score actually puts a hard inquiry check on your credit report, but this is not true. Actually, a soft inquiry check will never affect your credit score, so you could log in to, say, the Experian app and check your credit score as many times as you wanted in an hour, and it will never lower your score. But that is why generally when it comes to applying for brand new lines of credit, you want to try to space them out as much as you can. Generally 6 to 12 months is kind of the sweet spot here, because hard inquiries will generally fall off after that amount of time. And kind of the science behind it is generally if you're applying for a lot of brand new lines of credit, it will be kind of frowned upon by, say, the bureaus or lenders because it may label you as higher risk. Generally, the longer you wait, the better you'll be, and that 6 to 12 month mark is when they'll fall off entirely. So also, if you noticed after a credit application, just your score going down a couple of points, that is why. And these hard inquiry checks can stack too. So that's why you really want to be careful about how long you're waiting between your credit applications, especially for those of you who are just now building credit or maybe thinking about rebuilding credit. Definitely don't tank your score any more than it has to, and enjoy the time. You know, this is a journey. It's all about the journey, not so much, well, it is about the destination. We all want that perfect credit score. Don't get me wrong, but it is going to be a journey to get there, and it's going to be a long journey. It takes a lot of time to really maximize all of these categories we're discussing to get yourself to that 800 to 850 mark. So kind of moving on then to the next category, and the final category of the FICO score wheel and calculation of their scores is going to be credit mix. Now, this may sound kind of new to a lot of people. When it comes to credit lines, a lot of people just think of, you know, say a credit card and a mortgage, but there are a lot of different types of credit lines. And generally, the more diversified your credit portfolio is, the better this category will be. So a lot of people think having multiple, you know, lines of credit will actually lower your score, but in fact, it helps build your score and is required to get to that 800 to 850 credit mark. So generally, when it comes to the optimized amount of credit, or credit mix in this case, it will be anywhere from 5 to 6 credit cards, or, you know, 3 to 5 as well, especially if you're, you know, less than 5 years into building your credit journey, but also some installment loans, which are anything from, say, auto loans to personal loans, maybe student loans, as well as mortgages. Having all of these separate types of loans under your, you know, umbrella or portfolio of credit can show to credit lines and potential, you know, applications that you choose to throw out for new lines of credit, shows that you're able to handle multiple separate types and lines of credit, which in turn builds trust. Because at the end of the day, the credit score is just a one and done figure that is at a glance kind of look at your credit worthiness. And what I really mean by credit worthiness is just the trust factor to the lenders. Generally, that's all your credit score is going to be, is the overall trust factor that they kind of evaluate you at. So really kind of moving on, and I want to finish out the Vantage scoring table before we kind of move further down into the credit report. So we did talk about age and type of credit and how that was kind of a mixture of FICO's versions of amounts owed as well as length of credit history. So next up is going to be percent of credit used, which weighs in at 20% of your total Vantage score. So generally what it means by percent of credit used is that it's going to completely kind of factor in all of your credit utilization. Now, when I say credit utilization, I did say that you definitely want to use these cards. You don't want to have them at 0% utilization rate, because then they'll close. But you want to make sure you're not too close to that, you know, overall credit limit, because a lot of people will assume the credit limit is the hard kind of one and done, I can't go over this limit. But if you actually get too close to the credit limit, your score can drop. And it's a lot closer than you think, you know, or really, I guess, kind of vice versa of that. A lot of people don't expect it to be, you know, 30 to 50% where your score begins to drop of your total overall credit utilization rate. So what I recommend you do, and what we at the Credit Agents recommend you do, is that you kind of keep your credit finances under 30% of their total utilization to really make sure that you're not getting too close to lowering your credit score when it comes to you and your utilization. Now, there are going to be some cards that kind of entice you to go over this with their bonuses and rewards programs, but definitely try to refrain from doing that at all if possible, because they are there to try to get you over that limit sometimes, and you definitely want to make sure your credit score is not suffering because of a, say, credit card reward. So definitely be careful with those rewards, and if you're somebody who maybe wants to take advantage of those rewards, just keep in mind some of the risks that come along with that. So also, there is going to be a more optimized kind of range we'll recommend, which is generally from 1 to 7%, just to give you the buffer, because like I said, around 30% is where things are going to start, negatively affecting you with your credit utilization. So keeping it between 1 and 7% guarantees that it's never going to get closed out because you're not using the card, and you're giving yourself all of that room between 7 and 30% to really kind of play with. If you want to maybe go a little bit over 7%, you have that buffer there, and you never have to worry about 1 month you're able to keep it below 7%, and the next month maybe you have to go a little bit over with that card. But generally keeping it between those two ranges is a very, very good idea. So kind of moving on with some of the other Vantage scoring categories, we have the depth of credit, which is a lot like kind of the credit mix, but also combines a little bit more of the credit history, because it will factor in some of, once again, the length of credit history, as well as how much credit lines you how much credit you have available to you in those accounts, as well as some of the other depths of credit revolving around, the specific lines of credit, whether they're secured lines versus, unsecured credit cards, things like that. And then finally, you will have what is called balances, which is really just the outstanding balances on some of the lines of credit. So generally, all this information is going to be very generalized in these credit reports. They're all going to be readily available to you. And when it comes to a lot of credit applications, a lot of the lenders will do a full credit report check to really see the in-depth look at some of these, kind of credit lines you have, and wondering why your score is the way it is. But just keep in mind that all of this is going to be calculated into all of your credit scores. So no matter what, the credit report should be laid out the same. Now, the information available from each of the bureaus may be a little bit different, because not every single lender is going to be applying to the or not so much applying, but reporting to the exact same bureaus. They're not legally obliged to, as long as they report to at least one. So keep that in mind when it comes to you and your credit reports, and really try to keep in mind the best of the 3 major credit bureaus to do these polls from. The more detailed, generally, the better, as it's going to be the most reflective of your up-to-date and current scores. But also keep an eye out for both Vantage and FICO. Now, FICO is going to be kind of the more popular score, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Vantage is completely out of the equation. Actually, 80% of the top 25 lenders in the United States still use a Vantage scoring model for at least one of their applications. So it's not completely out of the equation, and a lot of the more popular kind of credit score checking sites use Vantage over FICO, as it's more readily available and is kind of the prime free version of the credit score. Now, it is a competitor to FICO, which, like I said, is one of the main reasons why they are separate scores, but they will kind of be used for separate types of equations and applications. Now, generally, you can find a lot of Vantage scores being used in things like apartment leases, when maybe they're not so much concerned about your FICO mortgage score, but they maybe want to check your Vantage score, even though it can be a different scoring model. Now, when it comes to mortgages and house applications, the FICO mortgage score is going to be the most dominant out of them. So if you're really in that mindset of maybe getting yourself into a house in the next 10, 15 years, definitely keep track of your FICO score. It's going to be the most reflective and probably the score that's going to be used when it comes to that application. But as all things do, things change. So things can, pop in and out of, relevancy. Maybe FICO eventually kind of drops down to maybe the 50-50 between the two. Who knows what the future holds with this? But maybe even a new credit scoring model kind of pops in. But it is still very important to kind of keep track of these, and if you can, definitely understand how they work. I know it's a lot of information, but you can definitely check our channels out on YouTube, where we have a more kind of in-depth look at both the FICO scoring model and the Vantage scoring model. So, but what else is there? So kind of going back to the credit report, we did talk a little bit about kind of what credit reports are used for, and generally kind of the personal information section, as well as kind of that second section with credit accounts. But what about other sections? There is going to be another section here that is labeled as public records. Now, depending on where you are, in life, or, your credit building process, you may not have a lot of things here. But this will include things like foreclosures, as well as bankruptcies, civil suits and judgments, and liens as well. So this is a category, especially if you're maybe in the repair process and say you have a bankruptcy, you'll want to keep an eye on this section, as this one may not update as frequently, as a lot of these types of, marks on your credit report take more time to fall off. But it's still a good idea to kind of keep track of where you're at with these things, because these will still factor into your credit score. So where can you check it then? Well, under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, you have the right to at least one free annual credit report from each of the 3 major credit bureaus. That includes Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. So generally, you can go to annualcreditreport.com, which is definitely what we recommend you do if, say, you haven't checked your credit report. And generally, you're not going to want to check this probably more than a month anyways. Now, if you're wanting to know your credit score, definitely check your credit score. But your credit report isn't going to be updating too rapidly, too quickly. It's only when you start seeing things on, say, your credit score you're not familiar with, or say, a rapid increase or decrease score-wise, that you might want to check your credit report. So definitely don't go too into a lot of the third parties unless you're in that credit monitoring phase, and definitely don't feel too bad if you haven't checked it yet either. I know it's a very scary thing to know about the credit score, and then all of a sudden the credit report kind of comes into play. But it is a vital tool, and I definitely promise it isn't too complicated to read. Once again, they pretty much clearly have those sections labeled out for you, and I feel like once you kind of wrap your head around it, anybody can really kind of read their credit report. And if you want a more detailed explanation as well, once again, check out our YouTube series, The Credit Academy, where we're actually now talking through the credit report and spending multiple episodes kind of breaking it down, trying to make it the most, simple and easy to use course as possible. And if you're kind of more interested in the credit repair side of things and doing it yourself, we have this credit score blueprint course done by our FICO certified credit expert, Joe Chavarria, where he will even give you free kind of disputing letter templates, which are generally the kind of the biggest wonder in the credit repair sphere right now. A lot of people are very hesitant to give that information out, so you'll have access to all of those templates, which will allow you to really kind of kickstart your credit building journey and do what we here do at the Credit Agents, repair credit. So kind of moving on then, what else can I tell you about you and your credit report? I mean, really, it's all a kind of on a dependent basis. Everybody's credit report is going to be different. Nobody's is going to be the same, but like I said, it's going to be kind of separated into those categories there. But yeah, that is pretty much about it. I see we don't have any comments or concerns right now, but definitely we're going to be uploading these as a video after the fact. So if you feel more comfortable, just kind of posting a comment there, definitely feel free to. That is a-okay. But yeah, definitely check out our other channels as well. And if you're interested in the credit score blueprint, the link for that will be in the description down below, as well as our YouTube channel, which once again has that Credit Academy course that is ongoing. And we have the Credit Agent Show kind of subcategory there as a show where you can learn a little bit more about kind of what's going on in the credit sphere and some of the more up-to-date topics of what is happening right now, because it is a very rapidly changing industry. Things can change at the drop of a hat, and we are going to be on it, keeping people updated on that. So also check out our other channels, such as our Instagram if you're interested in checking out some of our tips over there, and our Twitter account where we do a credit tip of the day, so you can get, you know, a little bit of credit advice every single day, and, you know, a character limit under 240. And then also we have an email list too if you're interested in our newsletter. And of course, you can check us out online at our website, creditagents.com, where you can try out our program through a free 15-minute consultation. So definitely thank you guys so much for tuning in. And definitely, if you guys have any questions or concerns or interested about the program as well, feel free to DM us on any of our platforms, and I'll be sure to get to you on that. So thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys in the next one.